Optimize your nutrition this year with Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never-frozen meals are dietitian approved, ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences, like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Eat smarter at factormeals.com/listen50 and use code LISTEN50 for 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Factormeals.com/listen50, code LISTEN50.
Support for this podcast and the following message is brought to you by E-Trade from Morgan Stanley. With E-Trade, you can dive into the market with easy-to-use tools, $0 commissions, and a wide range of investments. And now there's even more to love. Get access to industry-leading research and insights from Morgan Stanley to help guide your decisions. Open an account and get up to $1,000 or more with a qualifying deposit. Get started today at etrade.com. Terms and other fees apply. Investing involves risks. Morgan Stanley Smith Barney LLC, member SIPC. E-Trade is a business of Morgan Stanley. Picture this. You're in the garage, hands covered in grease, just finished up tuning your engine with a part you found on eBay. And you realize, you know what? I could also use new brakes. So where do you go next? Back to eBay. And you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. You order a part, and if it doesn't fit, send it back. Simple as that. So when you dive into your next car project, start with eBay. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love. What does the term digital workplace mean to you? In today's world of AI, robotics, and AR, it's much more than an office full of people on computers. It can be anywhere from a factory floor to the top of a crane to the cockpit of an F1 car. Wherever your digital workplace may be, TeamViewer's mission is to make work better. How? By securely connecting your people with the data, expertise, or insights they need in real time to make work more efficient. By automating and streamlining IT and OT support to fix problems before they happen, to make work more productive. And by bringing all the possibilities of a secure and flexible digital workplace to all your people everywhere, to make work more innovative. So discover how TeamViewer can make work better, wherever it happens across your business. Learn more at teamviewer.com/workbetter.
This is the Daily Tech News for Friday, May 16th, 2025. We tell you what you need to know, follow up on context, and just help each other understand.
Today, Meredith Rose from Public Knowledge explains why AI training data may or may not be fair use. And Epic and Apple are fighting again. And again, it's a thing. And unfortunately, Fortnite players lose.
You lose. I'm Tom Merritt.
I'm with Dow.
Let's start with what you need to know with the big story. Yep, they're at it again. Epic Games says Apple is not approving its latest update to the Fortnite app. The Fortnite app is no longer working on iOS. As a result, this is a complex issue. There's FUD on one side and pretty much silence on the other. But here's what we actually know. Epic re-released Fortnite for iOS in the European Union last year, August 16th, 2024. After the EU's Digital Markets Act required Apple to allow third-party payment options, side-loading of third-party apps, and full-on third-party app stores. It only released Fortnite through its own Epic Store and Alt Store PAL. It did not release it through Apple's own App Store, but it's been available there since in those ways. On April 30th this year, so not that long ago, a U.S. judge ordered Apple to allow links out to alternative payment options from apps in the U.S. store, and Epic said it would release Fortnite in the United States as a result. However, this is important to know because it may or may not play into all this. Apple had suspended Epic's U.S. developer account way back in August of 2020 because Epic violated the developer agreement by adding a non-Apple in-app payment system, something that Apple still doesn't have to allow. It's still a violation of Apple policies. So Epic doesn't have a U.S. developer account. It does, however, have an EU developer account. And last week, on May 9th, Epic said it had used its EU developer account to submit the Fortnite app for approval in the U.S. App Store. Wednesday, May 14th, 5 days later, Epic CEO Tim Sweeney posted that They're still waiting for approval, and they need to keep all the Fortnite apps up to date with all the new content because they push out new content weekly. So it had pulled the previous submission and submitted a new version for review, which presumably starts the clock ticking on review again. Then Friday morning, 2 days after that, May 16th, the Fortnite account posted that the app had not been approved yet, meaning it could not release in the US App Store or even in its own Epic Games Store for iOS in the EU, because again, they're saying they have to keep all this content in sync. So Fortnite will be offline worldwide until Apple approves the new submission to the US and EU stores. The Verge notes that it is not available on AltStore PAL in the EU either. Presumably, like I said, the reason is to keep this all in sync, though it's quite likely Epic could technically launch Fortnite in its own app store in the EU. It just doesn't want to keep a separate version going. Apple hasn't said a word as to why the app has not been approved, and Epic has not explained what, if anything, Apple has said about the approval. They may not have said anything. Sweeney has complained that it seems like Fortnite-like games have been approved for the App Store, alleging this is all on purpose. It's senior executives with an axe to grind against Epic. Meanwhile, one other story might shed some light on this situation. Patreon updated its app back on Monday, May 5th, to make external payments from its own website be the default for signing up for Patreon subscriptions. And the news today is that Patreon had to update that app because it wasn't sending people to a browser outside of the Patreon app, but using an in-app browser, which probably doesn't sound different to you, but Apple says, no, you have to link them out to Safari or Chrome or something. You can't just load a browser inside the app. That's the app experience, and we don't allow that. So it's possible something like that could hold up the Fortnite app approval in the US as well, but we don't know. There's no explanation from anybody about what the actual holdup is. When I know you know App Store approval processes quite familiarly, what do you make of all of this?
I think I agree that while given the broader context and all of the legal cases that we've discussed and all of the, in the news kind of back and forth between Apple and Fortnite, I honestly, this just seems like regular, unfortunate developer life churn, especially with big companies, having multiple accounts. And yes, app reviews can take as little as 24 hours, and sometimes it can take up just 2 weeks still in 2024, 2025. So this makes sense. And also I have so much sympathy for the Patreon devs with the distinction between an in-app browser versus an external browser. It's kind of crazy. I know, these kind of small differences make up, unfortunately, a lot of our life sometimes with the business and legal ramifications of these things happening. And of course, then that resets all kind of timers with reviews. So this just seems like an unfortunate, week in the Epic release story. So I think FUD is a good way to describe this. And also, having multiple versions of your app out there is a pain in the butt. It's a pain for support. It's a pain for especially, I'm not sure about this release either, but there's always marketing and other things that might tie into a big release. So companies like to time these things together, just to keep everything kind of neat and nice. So it all makes sense. My condolences to Fortnite players. I honestly don't really foresee much malicious other than the usual BS. So
at worst, it seems like from what you're saying, Apple might be dragging its heels a little on the review process, but it can take this long. It can. Yeah. It's not outside the realm of possibility. Yeah. And it's an opaque process, and it's hard to tell whether we wouldn't have no idea that from this point, whether there is something that Apple is doing to punish Epic or Fortnite, or it could just be little things like, hey, they literally have two accounts. Like a lot of places would look, that would be kind of a red flag for most cases, when you have multiple user accounts. So that could be taken to effect sometimes. And I know this is different because again, we'll call them partners, but big publishers. A lot of times, there's also kind of automatic checks in a system like the App Store or the Google Play Store where, sometimes if you have too many accounts and things like that, it's been also known to flag things. So we have no idea. There's a lot of things. If I'm the person reviewing this and Fortnite comes across my desk, I know that I am dotting my I's and crossing my T's inside of Apple because I don't want to get this wrong and get the heat from management because this is a high profile situation.
Exactly.
I'm going to double check with senior management. And if I'm senior management at Apple, I may not reply to that question from the reviewer immediately. I'll get to it, but it may not be the first thing I reply to. So
absolutely.
There's all those kinds of things. Yeah. Meanwhile, iOS players are missing out on the ability to chat with a generated version of Darth Vader in Fortnite's ongoing Star Wars event. The character uses a voice model trained on the voice of James Earl Jones, which we heard about last year, that he had approved this sort of thing to happen. Of course, people have immediately started to try to see what they can get the generated version of Darth Vader to say, such as, for example, this posting. I believe it is from a Blue Sky account. Let's listen now.
That will sustain me in battle.
What freaking food is that, Darth Vader? Tell me.
Double down.
Greeting.
Wow!
Such vulgarity does not become you.
Not allowed.
You inquire about sustenance.
Oh my God, no. Oh my God.
Like a common thug.
So that's from American Truck Songs 10 Blue Sky account. And as you can hear, Darth Vader just speaks off the top of his head.
Well, there you go. I wish I could use Darth Vader's voice to thank our patrons, but I can't, and I won't, and I can't. I won't do that to James Earl Jones. But we still want to remind you that DTNS is made possible by you, the listener, even if you have to hear my voice saying it. But thanks to Miranda Janelle, That Charlie Dude, Justin Sellers, and Mark Bowie.
I find your faith encouraging.
Picture this. You're in the garage, hands covered in grease, just finished up tuning your engine with a part you found on eBay, and you realize, you know what? I could also use new brakes. So where do you go next? Back to eBay. You can find anything there. It's unreal. Wipers, headlights, even cold air intakes. It's all there. And you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. You order a part, and if it doesn't fit, send it back. Simple as that. Look, DIY fixes can be major. Doesn't matter if it's just maintenance or a major mod. You got it, especially when things are guaranteed to fit. So when you dive into your next car project, start with eBay. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love.
When you think of hot, you might think about the tragic time you ate too much wasabi. Or about getting into your car on a summer day when it feels more like stepping into a sauna. But heat can work in your favor, like during Verizon Red Hot Deal Days. Get hundreds of hot deals on all your favorites, like iPhone 16 Pro with Apple Intelligence, Apple Watch Series 10, and iPad, on any plan. Only until May 28th for new and existing customers. Offer available on My Plan. Only at Verizon.
Worried about what ingredients are hiding in your groceries? Let us take the guesswork out. We're Thrive Market, the online grocery store with the highest quality standards in the industry. We restrict 1,000 plus ingredients, so you can trust that you'll only find the best high-quality, organic, and sustainable brands, all free of the junk. With savings up to 30% off and fast carbon-neutral shipping, you get top trusted groceries at your door, and you can stop worrying about what your kids get their hands on. Start shopping at thrivemarket.com/podcast for 30% off your first order and a free gift.
My husband and I recently realized that neither of us were getting the sleep we deserved. So we sat down and talked about our ideal beds. For him, soft as feathers. For me, firm as a plank. This would be a huge issue if it weren't for the Sleep Number Smart Bed. Thankfully, with our new Sleep Number Smart Bed, we can each dial in our desired sleep number settings to our ideal comfort and finally get the sleep we deserve. Plus, the Climate Series feature makes sure our bed stays nice and cool through the warm summer months. Why choose a Sleep Number Smart Bed? So you can choose your ideal comfort on either side. And now it's the Sleep Number Everything Smart Bed sale. Every smart bed and base are on sale during our Memorial Day event. Up to 50% off, limited time, exclusively at a Sleep Number store near you. See store or sleepnumber.com for details.
Support for this podcast and the following message is brought to you by E-Trade from Morgan Stanley. With E-Trade, you can dive into the market with easy-to-use tools, $0 commissions, and a wide range of investments. And now there's even more to love. Get access to industry-leading research and insights from Morgan Stanley to help guide your decisions. Open an account and get up to $1,000 or more with a qualifying deposit. Get started today at etrade.com. Terms and other fees apply. Investing involves risks. Morgan Stanley Smith Barney LLC member SIPC. E-Trade is a business of Morgan Stanley.
There's more we need to know today. Let's get to the briefs.
All right. Well, Acer announced several new products at Computex in Taipei, including more than a dozen new laptops. The Swift Edge 14 AI laptop weighs a half-pound less than the MacBook Air at 2.2 pounds. The Copilot Plus machine runs on Intel's Lunar Lake 32 gigabytes of RAM and an OLED display. It comes with 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, 2 USB-A ports, a headphone jack, and an HDMI 2.1 port. It is expected to start at €1,599 coming to Europe in June. Well, we've also got the Predator Triton 14 AI, which is marketed to gamers and content creators. It's relatively lightweight at 3.5 pounds and 2/3 of an inch thick. It has a 120 hertz OLED display, a big haptic trackpad, and a stylus running on the Arrow Lake Core Ultra 9 288V processor, and a GPU up to NVIDIA's GeForce RTX 5070. So Acer is touting graphene thermal interface material that increases thermal capacity as much as 4.5% over traditional thermal pastes. It starts at €2,999 coming to Europe in July. And to top it all off, you need something to look at all your games at. And there are 5 new gaming monitors, including one that has a peak refresh rate of 500 hertz. And most of these monitors will come to Europe, the Middle East, and China in Q3. No price or release dates for North America were announced.
Flooding the zone, I think, is what one of the outlets, I don't know if it was The Verge or Engadget said, but yeah, Acer does this at Computex every year, and some pretty impressive stuff.
500 hertz, my eyeballs, I don't know if they worked at that many hertz.
Yeah, I don't know if that matters or not. OpenAI launched a research preview of a coding agent called Codex, powered by a version of its O3 reasoning model called Codex 1. The agent is optimized for software engineering, so it should produce cleaner code than O3 would on its own, and it can connect to GitHub, so you can include your own code repositories right from jump. Subscribers to the enterprise and team levels get it now, with Plus and Edu users getting it soon.
Charter Communications has agreed to acquire Cox Communications, combining 2 of the top 3 cable companies in the U.S. Cox operates the largest private broadband company in the U.S., including commercial fiber and managed IT and cloud. It intends to continue offering services under its Spectrum brand.
Yeah, so we're seeing the consolidation of these into nationwide providers that compete with telcos like AT&T and Verizon. So if you wondered, like, what's the future of cable? It looks like the future of cable is becoming a telco. TDK says it will begin shipping the 3rd iteration of its silicone anode batteries ahead of schedule. So by the end of June, meaning they'll show up in smartphones a little faster. The new generation of batteries offer 15% more energy in the same amount of space. So more battery life in a smaller package. TDK supplies Apple and Samsung with batteries. You may have noticed Samsung just shipped a slim Galaxy phone that uses the 2nd generation TDK battery. Apple is expected to ship a slimmer phone later this year. Maybe that one will include the 3rd gen since it's ahead of schedule. TDK expects to launch a 4th generation of silicone anode batteries within the next year, meaning devices can get even slimmer.
Well, in one of the most epically named events ever, Pwn to Own kicked off in Berlin Friday, and security researchers took home $260,000 in prizes after finding zero-day exploits in Windows 11, Red Hat Linux, and Oracle VirtualBox. These are fresh discoveries against fully patched systems.
A big thanks to RW Nash for posting that on the subreddit. Not great news for Sony's continuing efforts to improve its live game services. Haven Studios founder Jade Raymond has left the Sony-owned studio. Sony thanked her, but did not give a reason for the departure. This, however, does come a few weeks after tests of online shooter Fair games from Haven caused some developers to express concern.
All right, well, Article 9 of Japan's constitution commits the country to pacifism. Friday, Japan enacted a law that permits the country's law enforcement to infiltrate and neutralize hostile servers before malicious activity has taken place.
Yeah, so it's still defensive, but it's proactive defense. And it's in the area of cyber security, not, physical military security, but it is an interesting change.
Absolutely.
In policy. And YouTube has begun publishing a chart of the most popular podcasts on the platform. To be considered, you just have to label your show as a podcast, and then YouTube says it's a podcast. For the week of May 5th, The Joe Rogan Experience is number 1, followed by Kill Tony, Rotten Mango, and 48 Hours. Yay, Stephanie Sue, Rotten Mango made it. Yay. I like that show. Those are the essentials for today. Let's dive a little deeper.
All right. Well, using copyrighted data in training generative models is a big area of contention. This week, the UK House of Commons blocked an amendment to a data bill that would have required companies to disclose use of copyrighted materials in training data. Last weekend, the U.S. Copyright Office published an early look at its guidance on whether using copyrighted works in training generative models could be defended as fair use or not. So to gain a better understanding of how using copyrighted data in training models might or might not be fair use, Tom, you talked to Senior Policy Counsel at Public Knowledge, Meredith Rose.
Meredith, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get into what this is about, the training data. From your perspective, what goes into training data that is of concern to places like the Copyright Office?
A lot. One of the fundamental questions about training any kind of AI model, though most of the discussion is sort of centered around LLMs, is just the volume of data that you need to put in the training set. And so this means almost inevitably, folks are going to run up against material that is copyrighted. And so the question becomes, is that a fair use under copyright law, or is this something that AI developers should have to license? And that's really what the report was about.
Yeah, and as I understand it, I think the report even acknowledges this. It's not that the copy is sitting on the database. It's that the copy was used to create the tool, and then the tool could also recreate it at the end, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different kind of components that went into this, and hats off to the Copyright Office for biting off an absolutely immense topic. AI training models can do all kinds of things, and I think that's one of the hardest things that they tried to grapple with in this report. So there's questions about, right, exactly like you said, you're feeding potentially copyrighted data to this machine in order to bring it up to a point where it can generate responses that you're looking for. You also have things like RAG models where they are going off and actively pulling new information from the web with sort of like a back-end search function. And what sort of things do those have in terms of, and that's a particular concern to journalism. And then you have situations of memorization where the model may accidentally, and I think everyone agrees it's not intentional. That is considered a bug by developers, that it accidentally memorizes something that's been trained on and can, with some creative prompting, output it at the other side. And they try to deal with all of these questions in this, 110-page report.
I know we could do whole years of study at a college course on this, but for the lay person out there just wanting to understand, what is considered a fair use of a copyrighted work?
Ooh, that's a big question.
I know.
So fair use is a doctrine in copyright law. It was originally developed by judges, and it's in the 1970s, it was sort of codified into the statute. But the idea behind fair use is that there are certain kinds of expression that may bump up against copyrighted materials, or may even use parts of copyrighted materials that for legal and policy reasons we think are fine. And so, one of the classic examples is things like parody, where you have to use something in order to make fun of it. There was a fantastic brief actually written by The Onion that was in a case that had to do with speech of somebody ostensibly impersonating a police officer. But they talked about how in order to do parody, you do need to actually pull the material from the thing that you're making fun of in order for it to be recognizable as parody. So that's like a classic example. But things like quotation for criticism and commentary, all kinds of expressions that you need to be able to pull from copyrighted material. There's 4 factors in it. It's a very sort of wobbly test. Might be a generous way of putting it, and even as somebody who personally and professionally will defend fair use to the death, it does not make for a terribly predictable legal system.
Yeah, I think that's a misimpression a lot of people have, is there isn't a fair use law, right? There are tests that court have used to decide if this is in fact deserving of an exemption. Do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a 4-factor test. It ranges from everything. I think a lot of folks think, well, if you're not monetizing the end result, then it's fine. And that is a factor, but it is not the determinative factor. A lot of times the closest you can get to having any kind of certainty on whether or not something is a fair use is if you're doing something very close to a case that has already been decided to be a fair use, then you're probably slightly more in the clear. But even then, it's not always going to turn out the way you think it is.
Which is one of the reasons I think there's so much uncertainty is we don't have any cases yet. I mean, there's lots underway, but we don't have settled law about large language models and whether it's a fair use or not. What are some of the arguments for and against using copyrighted works being a fair use for these machines?
Yeah, so the argument for is that what these models are doing is not copying the works per se. You know, the idea behind, and again, generalizing wildly because there's a lot of different ways of training models and there's a lot of different models with different sort of goals. But like generally the idea is that if you are training a model with copyrighted works, they're trying to extract sort of abstract factual information about, the average distance between two eyes in a portrait is about this. This is how color gradients work in photorealistic versus this particular kind of style. This is the frequency of certain kinds of tokens when you're talking about large language models. Large language models are, I've heard them referred to as spicy autocomplete, which is I think a really useful way of thinking about it, right? Because it's not necessarily thinking, it is predicting what statistically the most likely next token or fragment of a word is going to be in a sentence. And so the idea is the only way that you can achieve that is by exposing them to as much content as possible so they get the biggest possible data set. And so the argument for fair use is that this is transformative. You're not using a work specifically so the thing can regurgitate that work. You're using it to have it learn, quote unquote, from that work, that you are treating this also as a general purpose technology. So one of the most sort of famous cases around fair use had to do with the Sony Betamax. And whether or not this technology, which can be used to infringe upon copyrights by recording movies from the television, which is not a right. It's called format shifting, which is getting a little into the weeds. But, you can use this technology to infringe copyrights, but you can also do a lot of other important things that are well within your rights using this technology. And the Supreme Court said, look, just because you can use a thing to infringe doesn't mean that that's the only reason it exists. And so I think those are some of the arguments that come up in the pro-fair use side. The sort of anti-fair use side is often things like, well, this is actually being used to create works that directly compete with the things that it's trained on, which is an argument that's gotten more force in light of a recent Supreme Court decision about the Andy Warhol Foundation. Andy Warhol making things complicated for everybody, everywhere. So things like, well, this is being used, the outputs for these are being used to compete with the things that were used as inputs. Also arguments, one of the fair use factors is you have to consider what the new use is going to do to the market for the original. And so if two things are directly competing or displacing it in the market, then that could be a strike against fair use. And so one of the arguments against fair use in this case is, well, there's a licensing market for AI training right now. Especially companies like OpenAI are striking deals with big rights holders to allow them to train on these data sets. And so now they're saying, well, there's a market. You can just go license. In fact, people are offering licenses to this.
Yeah. So if you're a judge, those are the factors you're considering. And there's good arguments on both sides. Where do you come down on this? So
I think, again, and this sounds like a cop-out, the eternal lawyer answer, it depends. I do think as a policy matter, the reality of how fair use works and how fair use jurisprudence works is it really is kind of this spider web of interlinked decisions and interpretations of these different factors. And I think that coming down against fair use, it's going to depend very highly on how a judge does it. There's a lot of ways in which this can go, and a lot of different forms a decision can take and sort of what they think is the most important factors and how this model is trained to, so it sounds like a cop-out to say it depends. But what does keep me up at night is the fact that because fair use is so interlinked and interrelated to other fair use decisions and precedent, that there's a lot of room for it to go wrong. And in the process of saying, well, this particular thing is not a fair use, some imprecise language can end up upending things that we rely on fair use to do. So things like re-implementing APIs, which, the Supreme Court took up a couple of years ago.
Yeah, with Google.
a lot of headaches and a lot of fanfare. Things like that. Things like home recording being the paradigmatic example. Sampling. There's litigation right now around GitHub and Microsoft I think it's Copilot, where they use they're able to pull sort of public repository code samples into your code. So there's all these different ways that you could have knock-on effects unintentionally from a decision against fair use in this case, and you can have knock-on effects from a decision in favor of fair use as well. So I think it's hard. I don't know that there's a good answer to it, unfortunately.
Honestly, but what I come down on is I feel like we need new law. And I'm not even saying I know what that law should be, but there needs to be a new law to apply to this particular situation.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the Copyright Office actually kind of came out the other way and said, well, we think that, most of what copyright does already can handle this. Which I think people have a lot of mixed feelings about that. Some of the legislation that's been floating around in Congress makes me think maybe we shouldn't do that. I look at some of the possibilities and think maybe it's not so bad right now. But one of the things I think that does come out of this is we're really kind of tying ourselves in knots when it comes to how we make copyright, which was designed to deal with an analog world, work in the context of digital goods. And I think we're hitting the absolute outer limits of the logic and how far we can stretch it. And some of that does come out in the Copyright Office report as well.
Well, Meredith, thank you so much for helping us understand this a little better. I really appreciate it. If folks want to find more of what you do, where should they go?
Publicknowledge.org. It's all one word. We have a blog there that we keep updated with all the goings on. And also I am on Blue Sky, and my handle there is mrose.inc.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
And what do you want to hear us talk about on the show? One way to let us know is that subreddit. Like I mentioned, RW Nash posted something that we used. Submit your stories and vote on them at reddit.com/r/Daily Tech News Show.
Picture this. You're in the garage, hands covered in grease, just finished up tuning your engine with a part you found on eBay. And you realize, you know what? I could also use new brakes. So where do you go next? Back to eBay. You can find anything there. It's unreal. Wipers, headlights, even cold air intakes. It's all there. And you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. You order a part, and if it doesn't fit, send it back. Simple as that. Look, DIY fixes can be major. Doesn't matter if it's just maintenance or a major mod. You got it, especially when things are guaranteed to fit. So when you dive into your next car project, start with eBay. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love.
Optimize your nutrition this year with Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved, ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Eat smarter at factormeals.com/listen50 and use code listen50 for 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Factormeals.com/listen50. Code listen50.
We end every episode of DTNS with some shared wisdom. Today, Samuel is helping us understand.
Samuel writes, "Hey DTNS, I'm writing in about Tuesday's discussion on DTNS Live and DTNS Briefing about Apple's new accessibility features. As a visually impaired person, my favorite new feature is the accessibility labels in the App Store, since I occasionally run into apps that work poorly with VoiceOver, making them very difficult to use. I may be a little biased since I've never used an Android phone, but I think iPhones are the most accessible smartphones, or at least for visually impaired people. I have actually never met a legally blind person in Quebec or Ontario who uses an Android instead of an iPhone. I consider myself really lucky to be born the same year as the iPhone, since without it and its features like VoiceOver, Zoom, and the Magnifier app, I think my life would be a lot more difficult. Love the show. Keep up the great work, Samuel." First of all, wow, I'm old. Second of all, thank you, Samuel, for sharing your experience on this. This is great, and perfect opportunity for Huyen to make you aware of some of the Android stuff that's going on out there.
Yeah. So Samuel, I mean, I think it's really fair. There, you know, in the history, I mean, I know you might have not been around as long, Samuel, as some of the rest of us, but yeah, in the history of smartphones, I think there's definitely been a perception that Android is less good at certain things like design and accessibility. And for some time that was true, but I'm happy to report to you that in 2025, it's a little bit different. And in fact, I have to shout out one of our listeners on Android Faithful, so we make sure I get your name right. Hershey, who's I've actually chatted to with a lot, just usually on text. So my bad. And now I have to say your name out loud. But there is in fact quite a large group of Android users, enthusiastic ones that have formed, for example, the Blind Android Users Group, which has their own podcast. And I think it's funny because to address, you know, again, the perception that you, Samuel, of course, have, the description on the Blind Android Users YouTube channel says, making Android speak for itself and demystifying the myth about its accessibility from a blindness perspective. So there you go. I mean, you're not wrong, but there's some people saying out there, hey, you know, we can use Android as folks with, you know, a visual impairment, as well. Just also to shout out the iBug Today group, which does some like monthly calls that are, I think, Q&As, trainings that people can call in, and not just Android, but also iOS and other technologies can call in and ask questions and get training. In fact, our friend, Harshit Hershey participates in the Android Insights. And yeah, like, I just think it's really cool that there are a lot of, you know, people out there on either platform, talking about accessibility, and that we're just in 2025. There's also a lot of ways to access the information. Carry On Accessibility is a YouTube channel that Harshid mentioned me as well. So yeah, I just it's a really great time. And for what it's worth, as a developer, I know not all apps are good at this, but if anything, we know that we need to be better, and that a lot of companies do make accessibility priority-ish. We are aware that we could do better for what it's worth.
And I think it's fair. I think a lot of people, like you said, have the perception of like, Apple's so good at accessibility. Yes. I just don't know what else is out there. So thank you for making these available. We'll make sure to put these in the show notes at dailytechnewsshow.com. If Samuel or anybody else is curious to see things like blindandroidusers.com and iBug and all of that, I'd appreciate you bringing all this content. That's awesome.
Well, I have to definitely thank Harshid, who again is a Android Faithful listener and who is a wonderful and enthusiastic advocate for accessibility on Android. So thank you, dude. Well, what are you thinking about? Do you have some insight into a story for us? Share it at feedback@dailytechnewsshow.com.
Big thanks to Meredith Rose from Public Knowledge. Thanks to Samuel, and thanks to Harshid for contributing to today's show. And thank you for being along for Daily Tech News Show. The show is made possible by our patrons on patreon.com/DTNS. Quick note, the slots are going fast for a workshop in Austin, Texas. It's me, Andrew Heaton, Justin Robert Young, Matt Donnelly, and Brian Brushwood the weekend of June 27th. Find out more at bestnewsever.com. This week's episodes of Daily Tech News Show Briefing were created by the following people: host, producer, and writer Tom Merritt, host and writer Jason Howell, co-host Rob Dunwood, co-host Jen Cutter, co-host Wentway Dow, producer Anthony Lemos, producer Roger Chang, editor Hammond Chamberlain, editor Victor Bognot, science correspondent Dr. Nikki Ackermans, social media producer and moderator Zoe Detterding, our mods: Beatmaster, W. Scottus1, BioCow, Captain Kipper, Steve Guadarrama, Paul Reese, Matthew J. Stevens, a.k.a. Gadget Virtuoso, and J.D. Galloway. Mod and video hosting by Dan Christensen. Music provided by Martin Bell and Dan Luters. Art by Len Peralta. Acast ad support from Tatiana Matias. Patreon support from Tom McNeil. Our guests this week included Allison Sheridan, James Thatcher, Aaron Morton, Meredith Rose, and thanks to all our patrons who make the show possible.
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Get more at frogpants.com.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Support for this podcast and the following message is brought to you by E-Trade from Morgan Stanley. With E-Trade, you can dive into the market with easy-to-use tools, $0 commissions, and a wide range of investments. And now there's even more to love. Get access to industry-leading research and insights from Morgan Stanley to help guide your decisions. Open an account and get up to $1,000 or more with a qualifying deposit. Get started today at etrade.com. Terms and other fees apply. Investing involves risks. Morgan Stanley Smith Barney, LLC, member SIPC. E-Trade is a business of Morgan Stanley.
Every idea starts with a problem. Warby Parker's was simple. Glasses are too expensive. So they set out to change that. By designing glasses in-house and selling directly to customers, they're able to offer prescription eyewear that's expertly crafted and unexpectedly affordable. Warby Parker glasses are made from premium materials like impact-resistant polycarbonate and custom acetate. And they start at just $95, including prescription lenses. Get glasses made from the good stuff. Stop by a Warby Parker store near you.